Board games. You love them, so do I, and in this video I'm going to rank the top 10 board games of all time. And yes, my expert opinion is grounded on way too many hours of playing board games, so let's get it. The three metrics I'm going to be using to arrive at this profound conclusion are balance, depth, and replayability. Alright, so starting off in humble position number 10, we have Rummy. This is sort of an honorary mention. I had to include it. I played it every single Christmas with my family growing up forever. It is quite fun, but here are my ratings for it. Balance, 2.5 stars. Depth, 2.5 stars. And replayability, 3.5 stars. So the score for Rummy is 8.5 stars. For balance, I really don't feel like there's much skill to it. There are like those glimpses of glory when the board is full of pieces and you see the winning play and you've been taking like 15 minutes to think about and your uncle is telling you to hurry up. But you finally see the play and you need to move around like a bazillion pieces, but somehow it works. Just for those moments, the element of skill feels amazing and you feel like you have 400 million thousand IQ and it's super fun. But for most games, it feels like you're holding onto your pieces forever and just solely relying on luck. For depth, again, there's not much more to learn about it. Once you know the rules, you basically get the gist of it once you've played one or two games. You're relying on luck most of the time, and there is that glimpse of glory that you get one out of every like 5 or 6 games. And replayability is sort of fun. You get different scenarios every time you play. It is a fun game that you can just have a lighthearted time without having to think too much about it. We sort of have another must-have, and that is Monopoly. I spent way too many hours playing this, and it's a great way to get people into board games. It's fun, it's easy to play, it's lighthearted, and here are the ratings. Balance, 2.5 stars. Depth, 3 stars. And replayability, 3.5 stars. So that brings Monopoly's score to 9 stars. For balance, again, you're relying on luck for the vast majority of games. There are some glimpses of social dynamics and trades and stuff like that, and there are some basic strategies that you can learn, but for the most part, luck is what dictates who wins. For depth, I don't want to offend any pro Monopoly players watching this, but I don't think there's too much strategy. After I lost my first 1 to 2 games, I immediately went to YouTube to search up how to win, and I found that the most likely square on the board to fall on is prison, so the properties that are immediately after are the best ones to buy, and they also end up being pretty good in terms of how much you need to invest to buy houses on them. But yeah, besides that, there doesn't seem to be too much going on in terms of strategy, but correct me if I'm wrong. And finally, replayability. You do sort of get a somewhat fresh experience every time you play, and you can vary the players anywhere from 2 to 8 players, so 3.5 seems fine. Moving on, we have another classic of classics before we get to the hot takes, and that is Parcheesi, the classic game where players race to get their pawns home. Along the way, you can block and capture your opponents to get an advantage. In some places, it's known as Ludo, and there's even a sort of card version called Sorry. So for balance, I gave it 4 stars. For depth, I gave it 3 stars. And for replayability, 3.5 stars. So that gets Parcheesi to 10.5 stars. I realize my balance rating is probably controversial since most people would say that Parcheesi is mostly luck. But I've played more Parcheesis than the vast majority of people, especially recently, and I think there's more to the game than it seems at first glance. You actually get a decent amount of choice of what to do and what to move when, and I think it's a good mix for the type of game that it is, with luck versus choice. Especially if you're playing online and you're playing 2v2, there's quite a bit of strategy and choice that goes into that, and at the end of the day, it's supposed to be a lighthearted game anyway. For depth, just 3 stars, because yeah, there is a little bit of strategy that you can learn, at least at the beginning, but there just isn't that much to get into. And replayability, I think, is 3.5 because you can get a fresh experience, and even to this day, I encounter boards where crazy stuff happens that I've never seen before, but there's only so much that can happen. Next up, we have a much lesser known game, and that is Citadels. Citadels is a strategic card game focused on bluffing, role selection, and city building. Players collect gold and use their character's special abilities to build districts. For balance, I gave it 4.5 stars. For depth, I gave it 3.5. And for replayability, I gave it 4.5. So that means Citadels is 12.5 stars. In terms of balance, it's a weird game to categorize because there's not really luck or skill in the typical sense, because you're dealing with what other players think about you, and it's a very social game and almost like social deduction. So at the end of the day, you have a lot of input into the game, but it's not necessarily like theoretical skill. You can just interact with players and try to suss out what they are, and it's really fun in that way. and you actually have a lot of control in a way. You actually have maximum control. It's just not by the book like you would have in chess, for example. For depth, I give it 3.5 because there is a little bit of strategy, but there isn't that much you can get into. While there is a little bit to learn about what districts are the best and what characters to play when, a lot of the variables are social and you can't really study that per se. And replayability is super high because every game you're basically going to experience something different, given that depending on who you play with and what dynamics there are in terms of social dynamics is going to vary tremendously. Also, you can play anywhere from 2 to 8 players, so that can also give it quite a bit of variability and make it feel quite fresh. Next up, we have the newest game of any on here, and that is Risk Strike. Risk Strike actually just came out in 2022, and it's a streamlined, sort of fast-paced version of Risk. It maintains the essence of global domination, but it adds new mechanics to make it faster and more dynamic. For balance, I gave it 4.5 stars, for depth, 3.5, and for replayability, a whopping 5 stars. So that puts Risk Strike at 12.5 stars. In terms of balance, I think it's great because it still has the luck elements from Risk, where the situation you start with can be quite important, and there's the dice-based combat. However, you still have a lot of input because of the tactic cards. You can influence when you use them, how you use them, you can change a battle, and you can change the outcome of the entire game quite quickly. There's also quite a few of them, and some are super fun. You can change the outcome of the dice, you can spy on people's cards, and all sorts of other stuff. In terms of depth, there is quite a bit of strategy to unpack within your first, like, say, 10 games, but after that, you're probably not going to get much deeper than that. For replayability, I think it's great because since it's so fast, you can play many games and see all sorts of different dynamics within them. I've seen games be super short or super long, depending on luck, the dynamic of the players, if they have alliances, if they're cooperating, etc. Also, you can play anywhere from 2 to 5 players, and that can change it up quite a bit too. But mainly, since it's so dynamic and fast-paced, you want to get more games. Now, getting into our top 5, we have the classic of classics, chess. For balance, I gave it 3.5 stars. For depth, I gave it 5 stars. And for replayability, 4.5. So for chess, it's 13 stars. Okay, so balance might be a little controversial, but I just think chess involves so much skill that it sort of takes the game element out of it and makes it just a battle, a competition of ability. If you have a situation where one player is better in skill than the other one, that player is probably going to win. Now, since the elo system is so integrated into the game nowadays, I think it's not that imbalanced because it's very easy to know what your level is and to find people who you can play against. Depth is obviously 5 stars because you can study the game all your life and you'll never get to the bottom of it. So yeah. And replayability is really high because the game changes a lot, whether you're 600 rated or 2000, anywhere in between you're going to experience the game in all sorts of different ways. At first you're going to be bamboozled to see that your queen suddenly disappeared, and then you're going to be flabbergasted by seeing combinations of 5, 6 moves. It's super enjoyable in that way. But hey, don't shoot the messenger. I love chess. We're getting into my favorite games now, and in position number 4, we have Risk. Risk is a strategy game of global conquest. In it, players deploy armies and capture territories, and the goal is to outmaneuver your opponents and humbly dominate the world. For balance, I gave it 4.5 stars. For depth, I gave it 4.5 stars. And for replayability, I gave it 4.5 stars. And that puts Risk at 13.5 stars. For balance, kind of what I said for Risk Strike applies. There's a bit of luck involved with how you spawn in the map and also with your dice rolls. But besides that, the vast majority of it comes down to social tension, alliances, when you decide to attack, where you decide to go, and how you strategize your situation. For depth, I would have been tempted to put it lower, but I have a friend who's a grandmaster and he yaps about how much strategy is involved in Risk. So recently I've been playing quite a bit, and I do think there's so much to learn in this game, and I love it. And for replayability, the experience varies a lot from game to game, and there's also plenty of maps that you can play and get a fresh experience. Okay, we're into the top 3 now, and number 3 is Through the Ages. Through the Ages is one of my favorite games ever, and it's a strategy game where you build a civilization. The idea is that you guide your society by managing resources, building wonders, developing technologies, and picking the right historic leaders. There's so much strategy to it, and it's super history themed, and I love it. So for balance, I gave it 4.5 stars. Depth, I gave it 5 stars, and for replayability, I gave it 4. So Through the Ages has a score of 13.5. In terms of balance, there's so much stuff that you can do, and a lot of it comes down to knowing the basics at least and knowing some strategy. But there's just enough luck involving what cards you get to pick to where you can't just know the theory, you have to apply it in the moment, and every game is sort of different. In terms of depth, there's so much strategy to learn and discuss because there's so many actions that you can do and so many routes that you can go and so many different variations and combinations with one leader and this technology and these resources and this stage of the game. There's just so many options and variables. And in terms of replayability, it does vary quite a bit depending on what you pick at every stage of the game, but the games are so long that you're probably not going to be playing too many of these. Okay, now we're entering one of my favorite categories of games, and that is social deduction games. Social deduction games are games where you use deception, logic, and teamwork to uncover hidden roles and achieve secret goals. The most popular of these games is obviously Among Us. And there's so many that are super fun like Avalon or Secret Hit, but my favorite of them all is Undercover. Undercover is a super minimalist social deduction game that you can play just with one phone that you pass around, and the phone will give everyone one word, the same word. So everyone will have the same word except for one person who has a slightly different word. Now, none of the players know the other player's words, and they don't even know if they have the different word themselves. And then everyone goes in a circle describing their word, and at the end, you vote who you think is the undercover. But if that wasn't enough, there's a third character called Mr. White who doesn't have a word at all. So you just have to pretend and go along and hope that no one votes them. So for balance, I gave it 4.5 stars. For depth, I gave it 4 stars. And for replayability, I gave it 5 stars. So for Undercover, the score is 13.5. So for balance, we kind of go back to what I said in Citadels. It's not the typical luck or skill. It's all about social dynamics. But the beauty is that you basically have 100% influence over the game, whether that's good or bad. You're going to be influenced in the game with everything you say. In terms of depth, again, it's not the conventional sort of theory, strategy approach to it, but there's so many layers to it. But in a very fun, like fresh way, and it's all just talking, which is super fun. In replayability, you just get a super fresh experience every time you play, depending on the people, the dynamics, how skeptical one is, how trustworthy someone else is. Also, you can play with anywhere from 3 to 20 players, and obviously that changes the dynamic tremendously. And finally, at the top of the podium, gold medal, number 1, we have Catan. Catan is a strategy game where players collect resources and trade with each other. The goal is to build settlements and cities and earn points to control the island. I'm already hearing the skeptics say, oh, he put Catan number 1 like he works for Colonist. And yes, I work for Colonist, but that's because I love Catan and not the other way around. Anyways, for balance, we have 5 stars. For depth, we have 4.5 stars. And for replayability, we have 4.5 stars. So the top score is Catan with 14 stars. For balance, I really think it's the perfect mix of strategy versus luck versus social relations, to where you have so much input into the game, but there's also luck involved. I just think it's super fun and super balanced. For depth, I think it's really high, and the more I learn about the game and the more I talk to pro players, the more I realize there's so much strategy and so much to learn about this game. And I think a clear testament to that is the fact that the best players in the world are winning tournaments like super consistently. And finally, I think replayability is quite high because the board changes every time, the dynamics on the board change every time, when you place changes every time, and where you place changes every time, and that is one of the biggest decisions you have to make on the board. Also, you have expansions and different maps, and on Colonist you have 1v1, which is a mode that's super fast paced and I've been playing a lot of recently. Subscribe for more hot takes.